So in this video I'm going to make up some extended LCAs just by lengthening the... Damn it. Okay, so in this video I'm going to make up, or show you how to make up some extended LCAs. These are just the factory S13 LCA with factory lock stop. Basically all you have to do to make extended ones is cut the standard lock stop off, cut the LCA, add some material in and lengthen it. The hard bit in that is making sure that they're cut in the same place and extended in the same place. So that's where this comes in. And all this is a jig to hold the LCAs in place while you cut them so you can have repetitive cuts. So this is just a piece of square RHS or rectangle RHS with this little rod welded to it and this tab. So this fits through the bushing and then I just weld the LCA down. So now the LCA is mounted on a nice flat base that I can take measurements from and then clamp this in the saw to cut it with. First thing we're going to do is remove the factory lock stop by just grinding the welds off. Okay, lock stops are ground back now. I cut in a bit too deep in some spots, but we can touch that up later. Got to grind off the sway bar thingy. So now that the LCAs have the lock stops cut off, they're ready to be put on the jig and welded down, ready to go in the saw. It's only going to be welded in a few places because the welds only have to hold it while we cut it, and then we have to cut the welds off. So when we put the LCA in the saw, we need to make sure it's in the correct spot to cut. And the idea of the jig is we always put the jig in the same spot, and then when this LCA gets taken off and the other one gets put on, because they're on this pin, it means that the second LCA is going to be cut in exactly the same place as the first one. So because I've never used this jig on this saw before, we're going to have to make sure that it's in the position we want. So we want it to cut somewhere here between the caster rod mounts and the ball joint. So about there somewhere. What we'll do is mark the bottom of the jig along here. So I've got a mark now to go off, and I'm just going to weld a piece of RHS to the mark so I can put it in and slide it up against it. So now the end stop is welded into place. When we put this in the saw, it sits up where we want it to sit, and then when we do the next one, we know the next one will go into the same place. Now all you have to do is weld these together and you have one miniature LCA. Not really, don't do that. Just give these edges a quick clean up and then we're ready to do the next part. So this particular set of LCAs we're going to lengthen by 30mm. So this is 3mm thick, just mild steel. We're going to mark a 30mm strip and then cut it with the grinder. So what I'm going to do to get my 30mm accurate is scribble a nice fat line like this. And then do that a couple of times along the length of it. So what we're going to do now is just set the calipers to 30mm on the dot, and then scribe a line that we're going to cut with the grinder. Because we can't cut particularly accurately with the grinder, and the accuracy of this is going to depend on how straight the LCAs end up being, we're going to cut close to the line with the grinder and then finish it accurately with a file. So now that the piece is cut, we're going to file down to the line that we marked to make sure that it's accurate. So now that this is cut into a nice straight piece, we're going to measure the height of the LCA, which is about 40mm, and then we'll mark just over 40mm, so let's say 50 onto our piece of material. And then we'll measure the top of the LCA, which is 60. We'll measure along 60. And then, yeah, I'm going to try and bend this in my sheet metal bender My bender is rated for 1mm thickness, and this is 3mm thickness, but hopefully if I swing off it, it should probably bend it. If not, we'll have to put it in the vise and smack with a hammer. Oh yes, look at that, like it was made for it. So now that we've got this bent, we're going to put it up to our LCA and cut it 3mm shorter than the LCA. So cut it there and mark there. So once we've got our piece cut, we can make sure it fits up to the LCA. The idea behind cutting it 3mm short is we can then cut another strip to weld onto the bottom to fill in where these little edges are on the LCA. So now that we've got our pieces cut and they all match up, we're ready to start tacking it together. Before we tack it, I'm just going to clean the paint off the LCA so it welds nicer. Alright, so I've got the first one bent up, just marking up and bending the second one. So I need to cut a little bit more steel to make the last bottom piece. The advantages of marking it with the calipers is I can use them to continue the line along, and I know that this is going to be exactly the same size as the other piece because they're still set from marking it last time. So here's all our pieces done. Everything's been cut, cleaned, and is ready to weld together. So the part that we're going to weld first is this upper piece. All I'm going to do is use a welding magnet to hold it in place, and then once it's held in the correct position, it's ready to be tacked on. Now that it's tacked together, before we add the bottom section, we want to weld in and around the inside here, because once we weld the bottom in, it'll be too hard to get the welder in there. Okay, so now that the insides of this are welded, we're ready to add on our bottom piece. Now this bottom piece welded across there will add some strength to it, and we've made it a bit longer, so we should add some strength to it. But do not do this thing that people love to do where they weld a huge plate on the bottom of the LCA. All that does is make the LCA stronger, which is what they're trying to do, but when you crash, something has to give. You can't just have everything super strong. And when you crash, I'd rather have an LCA bend than a subframe. And these plates that people weld in here, all that does is transfer the damage from your LCA to your subframe. And I definitely know that changing an LCA is a lot easier than changing a subframe, so don't weld these big stupid plates in here, make the LCAs overly strong. This little bottom piece is going to help reinforce where we've lengthened it, and that's all it's going to need. Now that our bottom piece is welded in, we're ready to weld all the way around the outside and as far down around the bottom piece as we can. Okay, so now that where's the thing? Now that we're welded all the way around, we've got to do the other side, and then it's ready to be cleaned up. Clean all the bits from where we had it welded to the jig off, clean all the bits of spattery, bally stuff off, and then paint it, ready to go in the car. So I've just wheeled all the gasless MIG stuff off it. We'll give it a quick hit with the flap disc to get rid of any leftover spatter and the marks from where we welded it to the jig. You probably don't want to grind too much of the weld down because you'll remove the strength from it, but depending on how good your welds are, then you might want to do a bit more grinding than some others, because I'm sure you know how the saying goes, grinder and paint make me the welder I ain't. Give them a quick wash with some water to get all the dust off, and then ready to get some paint onto them, stop them rusting where we've left all our welds bare. Just going to tape up the nice red bushings in the ball joint and then give it some paint. So hopefully that video was useful to some people and allow you to extend your own LCAs rather than getting bought ones or getting a shop to do it. It's a pretty easy job, like there's nothing critical in it. The only thing is your welding needs to be okay because it's supporting the weight of your car pretty much, but it is thick steel and you do weld it from both sides, so if your welding's average, it should be fine. But I wouldn't do it as a sort of first welding project because it is sort of an important joint. This sort of strategy of using the same jigging, it works for like pretty much every car with a pressed steel LCA, so this applies to heaps of different Toyotas like K70s and stuff. These are for a Silvia, but it's the same as Silvia and Skyline, and yeah, it's a simple job, it's cheap to do, simple tools. It's definitely something you should do at home. Yeah. Ready to go in the car.